Hey, what's good everybody? My name's Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. I think that I've tried to film this video like 15 times already, and every time I do, I end up getting lost and just messing with different sounds and stuff, which is actually a good thing because that brings up the point of this review, which is based off of this new plugin called the Concatenator. I don't actually know how new it is, but Datamind reached out to me and was like, yo, you want to try this plugin? And I was like, sure, I don't know what it does, but why not? To which, thank you. They also have no say-so within this review, so everything that I mention is purely my own thoughts, in case if you're wondering. I just think that's good to say for the sake of transparency. What is this thing? It is a... How did Frequent put it? It is like a sound mosaicer or something of the sort. In a literal sense, what it will do is it will take an incoming signal, it's an effect, and try to resynthesize whatever that signal is based off of a sample selection that you put into it, to which you can put a massive amount of samples on here. I think this instance here has well over 200. Yeah, so quite a bit. And you can see that I've still got plenty of RAM to upload more stuff in here. On paper, you can use this for things like sound design for Foley or for recreating certain instances of, short sounds or whatever that have a similar library. So if I have something of like footsteps and then I record a bunch of other different footsteps and I'm looking for variations, this is actually extremely handy for that. Where I find this to be the most useful though is just really leaning into the randomization that it can potentially offer. Because if you have something, say even a sine wave, and then you have just a huge variety of random sounds and samples to toss in there, like obviously like you're going to get different stuff that is going to be absolutely nuts and bonkers. So I kind of want to talk about this a bit because, and sorry, I know that you want to hear what this sounds like. I'm not trying to stall or anything, but I think that it's important to paint a picture about who this is for, because I think that you're going to kind of be one of two reactions, or have one of two reactions. One is you're going to open this up and be like, oh, dang, that's sick. And be like, look at how much crazy stuff you get out of this. The other would be like, oh, it might be kind of cool, but how do I use any of this? And what is the purpose of it? And I want to address that one first. There's two different ways that I have already used this in a practical sense. The first one is that this is a great way to create fills, textures, glitches, and random stuff that smashes together very quickly based off of the nature of how this spits out sound. The second is that if you do have something that is melodic, or you have something that has a little bit more of a phrase, it can serve as a loose guideline to help you come up with other track ideas. And we're going to kind of explore both of those ideas here, although I will say I'm going to try my best not to get lost in sound design like I have every other recording of this video. So now that we've kind of discussed that, I'm sorry it took so long to get there, I've got a couple of sounds to reference. So the first one is this bass that I made yesterday. As you can see, I've labeled it phonetically, which I've started doing on all my basses lately just for the fun of it. But yeah, it's kind of a talking bass thing that sounds like woo mbe or something like that. And what we can do is turn on the concatenator and start inserting the signal in here. This is all of my rolling sampler library from the past month. So it's got everything from drums to melodies to basses and stuff, whatever. But let's take a listen to how this sounds. So as you can see, sometimes it's phrasing some of these other basses I have, and sometimes it's just firing off some other random stuff that is like, what? I'm actually pretty fond of this because kind of like what I was talking about from before, I'm just going to show you a very loose example of this so I don't waste your time, but take a listen to this. Let me turn this off. Yeah, like this is something that you can use as a loop, right? I will just spend a couple seconds on this, changing this into something that will loop as seamless as possible. Yeah. So as an intro or something like that, maybe even not necessarily for a track idea, but something as a starting vibe, this can be super useful. And that's part of the reason why I like using this, because I can throw some drums, or I can throw, just what did I do? I made this in a different video iteration or recording of this, but I also sourced this little loop here from the Concatenator, and just kind of pitting up different sounds together with this can sometimes be very liberating, because I'm not really worried about doing anything right. I'm just being like, what happens if I do this? I'm like, okay, well, I got a little vibe, right? And that's kind of where this synth can lead you if you have the right mindset behind it. The other thing is, if we take this out and then we use this and we're like, you know what, I like this, I want to try to find some more variations to it, we can start to go down this rabbit hole of like synthesis to resynthesis to resynthesis to resynthesis, which is ironic because we're just re-expressing the same sample library. But you can kind of hone in on whatever feeling that you're having based off of what it is that you're doing. So I don't know. Let's see if we can come up with anything else interesting with this. Interesting that it's phrasing drums. That's kind of cool as a phrase. Do, do, wow, right? So. That's kind of fun. Yeah, so there's that. The other thing is that that I was going to show you is that sometimes if you actually just have a melody, which this is nothing special, but I don't know, it's kind of like a Final Fantasy X little chord progression that this reminds me of some temple or something, but yeah, it's pretty cool. So if we turn this back on and we start messing with this, then maybe we can find something either harmonious or something that is kind of in a similar flavor or something. Interesting. So again, just kind of talking about different possibilities and different ideas and whatnot. The whole point of this is that it, for me anyways, like I have such a large sample library of things that I almost never touch. And so because I can toss such a huge amount of samples into this and just have it spit out stuff at random, it's kind of nice to be able to, you know, have this kind of be like, hey, what about this? Or hey, what about this? And I can just sit with it and not have any direction, or not have to be like, yo, I need to be like really hyper specific about it. But kind of like before, I looked through all this other stuff, and there are things that you can use either just as a starting atmosphere. Maybe not that last part, this, but if I can kind of take this and just repeat this, yeah, that's actually kind of sick. So just as a nice little like, yeah, just something that you can kind of repeat and kind of listen to and kind of sit down with and be like, all right, how do I feel about this? It's kind of nice to have something that will just give you very instant gratification. I wouldn't say like you should rely on this to come up with track ideas, but at the same time, if you're just having a day where you're messing around or being like, man, I should probably use all those samples that I spent all this time making, or, you purchased a sample pack that you hadn't taken the time to go through or whatever, this can be a great way to reintroduce some of those concepts. Now, that being said, it's not perfect, and I do think that there are some things that I would like to be improved. The biggest thing for me is that I would like to be able to slow down the rate at which these samples are firing off, maybe even increase, I wouldn't necessarily say the stickiness, but something to where it needs to complete more of the sample before it plays another one, for the sake of trying to find those track ideas, if you will. Um, but other than that, this is such an experimental thing that you kind of have to just like, I don't know, I'm still learning it and still kind of messing with it myself. So, as far as what happens with the functionality of this, you have a few different controls over on the right side that kind of dictate how this is going to behave. So, just kind of, I don't know. I kind of have to read some of these other than these two. These are actually these, but this one is a little bit confusing to me. So it says it controls the number of particles used for random sampling of the corpus. Higher values tend to improve audio quality, but also heavily increase CPU usage. I think this is a quality factor. I'm not too sure, but that's a little bit confusing to me as far as what that does. Polyphony is self-explanatory. I usually keep this at 1 because I don't want samples overlapping each other, because that's when you get like just a crazy mess of a nothing burger. Um, if I can kind of try to make these play one after another, then it's a little bit easier and a little bit more clear for me to kind of hear what's happening. But, if you have something that is a relatively, I don't know, if you have something that's like a sound effect of like impacts, or you're trying to create like a smear of like claps, or, like squishing watermelons or something for that kind of effect, it would make sense to use polyphony in that world. The spectral and the amplitude weight are kind of self-explanatory. This is going to kind of try to play samples based off of the spectral information and off of the loudness information of here. Um, just means that it's going to be more random, long story short. The variation is how many samples have to play before the same one is repeated, or the initial one is repeated. So if you turn this all the way out, then this needs to go through, I'm going to guess, 100 or all of the samples before it goes back to the initial sample that was played. And then the stickiness is kind of how long it holds on to that sample. So if this is down, then it's just going to fire stuff at random. Yeah, like I said, it would be nice if maybe we could even increase this a little bit more, so that way it will have to play through. But I will also say that I kind of still don't know what I'm doing with this. Like, I have an idea, but yeah, there's still a lot to be learned with this. So the other thing that you have here is this one-shot mode. I don't quite understand what this does either, but it says samples below this length will be considered a one-shot sample. Samples longer than this will value. Samples in this value will behave normally. So initially I thought that like if it's 2 seconds long, then it'll play this at 2 seconds long, but I don't necessarily think that's how that behaves. I should probably consult the manual, but yeah, we'll say that. Aside from that, you've got some mix controls, dual mono or stereo, and then you actually have some modulators here that you can kind of morph in between. There is a sample and hold, which is nice, and then you can slew it if you wanted to kind of be a little bit softer on the randomization and have a little bit more curves, which is nice. I don't actually use this in particular, though it is kind of nice if you're just trying to randomize stuff more, because again, this is kind of a random plugin, but all you have to do is click and drag, and then you can kind of make this jump in between all different kinds of stuff and just kind of get nothing but chaos. Again, for sound design for like games and all that, I could actually see this being relatively useful, but for musical purposes, I probably would not use this very much, just from a practicality sense. So now that we understand the plugin, I think that that's enough information to kind of get you up and going. Let's go ahead and take a look at this track that I have as quickly as possible. And I'll show you just some small instances of where I have been successful in using this to help me kind of flesh out a track. This is a project that I did for Current. I've got some user-generated content going to be released with them pretty soon. And the other day we did this pretty much entirely on stream. I was just like, hey, why don't we make a track exclusively with Current? As you can see, it's like current. But yeah, these little instances right here, I'm going to wait for this to load, are just some of those examples that I've pulled out. But you'll kind of hear where I've been able to use them as fills and little details that help support the rest of the track. I'm going to start from here, and then let's take a listen. Listen for the orange sounds. Yeah. So, having just small instances and little snippets of that is super useful. And the way that I got to this stuff was I just put it on the master and just had it listen to the main bass. And then I was like, oh, great, those are cool. Just tossed them in. So that'll kind of lead to my final thing. This plugin's usefulness is entirely dependent on two things. The first and most important, obviously, is your imagination of how you approach this and how you can take a spin on whatever randomness it outputs. The other thing, which is also obvious, is your sound selection that you put into it, right? I mean, you're not going to get neurobass if you only put snares in this and you put it over a neurobass. It's just not going to happen, you know? So it is going to be dependent on what you're able to put into it. But that being said, something that can be extremely useful is to just take one starting point. So like, let's say a random sound generator. I've got plenty of tutorials of that on the channel. And then you use that, put the random sound generator on the random sound generator, and then you just start to create more sample libraries and all of that stuff based off of what the input signal is, and then trying to abuse, you know, how fast this plays and using effects on top of this. Something else that you might want to try is using multiple instances of this, so like a concatenator on a concatenator. I've done that in the past, and that's been pretty interesting, but it's kind of up to you of how you abuse this. I wanted to tell you all of this because this is a plugin that I like. It is a little bit pricey. It's 150 bucks on their website, I believe. I do not have an affiliate link, nor am I trying to sell you on this. It's just what it is. But if you're looking for a cool way to quickfire, you know, something that you're already sitting on and maybe never use, this could be a great alternative to just being like, man, I just want to fire this up and kind of have some fun for an afternoon and see what it does. And in some cases, you know, if you're trying to use different samples and stuff to recreate a drum loop using different drum sounds, that's something that you can also consider as well. It's really just a matter of getting in there and kind of messing with it. That would be my only other complaint, and I'll leave with that because for the most part I do have nothing but good things to say about this. The quality, even with the particles turned all the way up, still gives me like granular vibes, and so it's probably not the best for like using for solid transient information. There is a little bit of degradation that comes with this, and that's just kind of the, you know, that's the byproduct of how crazy this actual device is. You know, it's going to kind of downgrade it a little bit and smear it and kind of mess up the clarity of whatever it is that you're using. But from a random generative standpoint, it's a lot of fun to use, and I would definitely say, wait, do they offer a demo? I didn't even look. If they have a demo, I would definitely say demo everything before. I don't see anything. Free 7-day trial. So yeah, definitely trial this before you buy anything. I think that's the most important thing. And let me know whether or not this plugin is for you. Big thanks to Datamine Audio. I really appreciate you guys, you know, helping support the channel and stuff. And it's been a lot of fun to kind of just mess with this. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you need some samples or some sounds to get started, alckemy.com is the place for you. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening.